Welcome to SFG Top Performance. My name is Derrick, and with us today we have Jason and Taylor from our Centerville location. Today we're going to talk about corn and soybean progress out in the fields, what's going on out there, some alfalfa fertilization responses, and then planning soil sampling and lime applications for fall. Taylor, would you like to kick us off, and how are the soybeans looking down in the Centerville area?
Really, the stuff that we got in early looks pretty good for the most part. The later planted stuff's all over the board. It just kind of depends on where it's at. The more rolling ground looks better. The flatter stuff, we've just had so much rain, it doesn't look good. So,
you bet. And a lot of what we've seen up north and all the way when we get into our southern locations too is the last couple weeks we've seen some yellowing out in the fields, and we've got a lot of questions on it. It kind of came on quick and kind of surprised us, and what we really think it is just those wet areas of the fields early on that were uneven. They kind of came out of it, but we're just seeing these yellowing pockets. So we've been getting a lot of questions about it, and what I think it is, I think it's just the wet spots, and it's actually a lack of nitrogen in soybeans. We don't talk about that very much, but soybeans actually use more nitrogen than corn does. It just makes its own, and when those roots are wet early on, the nodules can't produce as much, so it makes it run out of gas later in the year. That's what I think a lot is what's going on in those areas. A couple other things it could be, if the yellowing's on the outside edge, usually that's a potassium deficiency, and this is the time of year that it dries out a little bit and those show up from time to time. Or we haven't had a lot of rain, so if it's on the edge of the field, it could even be a spider mite issue, or it could be the start of sudden death. So really, you just got to get your agronomist out there to help diagnose what it is, to figure out what you can do for next year. There's not a lot of fixes this time of year, but we can get out there and figure out what we can do to prevent it for the next year. Jason, we've been doing a lot of pod counts and stand counts, and what does that mean for yield in the area?
Well, at this point, I always say August rain makes beans. That tells us whether, the pod count, at this point, they can either abort pods or they're going to grow new pods as the season continues, depending on whether we get rain or dry weather. If we get the dry weather, we're going to abort a lot of these beautiful pods we're seeing. So we hope we get the rain. August rain makes beans. So I'm seeing a lot of variety in our beans as I look around. Anywhere from 50 to 120, which is phenomenal. 50 is usually very good. So what I'm seeing is looking like a very good bean count from the pod counts. Typically, I know this is a wild off-the-wall estimate. I use 1 bushel per pod I see on a plant if it's 140,000. And in the past, with what's been, when it aborts and whatnot, that's been fairly close. Gets us within 10 bushel. So, some of these 50 to, I don't think we'll see 120 bushel beans, but I think beans are going to be very good. So it just depends on August rain. We can do anything we want all year round, but if we don't get that moisture when the pods are being formed, they abort, and we can have all the plant health, and that helps save a lot of the pods from being aborted, the fungicides and the insecticides, and keeping insects from chewing on the pods and causing abortion. And there's a lot of things that can cause it, and some of these yellow spots, the nitrogen deficiencies, the potash deficiencies, they can all cause more abortion in the pods than we want to see. So that the pod counts, yes, they give us a rough idea of what could be there, but there's a lot of factors yet to be determined in a soybean plant. Corn, on the other hand, is a little more stable at this point, but soybeans are very unpredictable for the next month. So
I've kind of been talking to guys back over this past week, and really last year going into August, I felt a lot better than we have this year. The conditions going into August last year were just about perfect, and I thought, oh, these beans are going to be great. But then it, like you say, the water shut off all of August last year, and then beans were good, but they weren't near as good as they were looking like going forward. But this year they've had about every weather extreme, and they're still potted up like crazy, like you say. So I'm still excited about it. We put a lot of fungicide on beans to help keep that growing, keep them growing longer. So there should still be a lot of potential.
Yep. And I was out in the field. It was back. Beans were just hitting R2 or whatever, and I had a customer that was kind of disgusted at how his beans look because he had some areas where the stand wasn't as good and the areas where the stand was about perfect. And he said that the areas where the stand wasn't good, it just seemed like the beans weren't growing. We went out there, pulled some plants, stripped the leaves off. Although the plants were about 8 inches shorter, exactly the same amount of nodes. So there's still a lot of potential in them plants. It's just height's not necessarily a direct correlation to yield. So
At the point we're putting the fungicides on, we promoted a lot of insecticide, and we hadn't seen a lot of bugs. But since then, I've seen several fields of aphids, and where we put the insecticides on the field right next to the one I'm finding aphids, I'm not finding any in there. So I think the insecticide did pay off. I see a lot of Japanese beetles in spots. I see a lot of aphids in spots, and they're scattered, but there are some fields have a heavy population, and where we applied the insecticide, of course, we don't have that. So I think that definitely paid off in them areas where we have several areas over around Indianola and Milo that there are some aphids, so it was a benefit. So
Now, Taylor, what about corn down in the Centerville area? Last time you were on the podcast, we were talking about replant corn. How has that late corn handled this weather, or what's it looking like down there?
some of it looks pretty good, some of it not so much. The wet weather really hurt it. I was out in some of it the other day that was probably some of the latest replanted stuff that we had, and it was just starting to tassel. So that corn's got a long ways to go. The worst part about it was we had 2 weeks of really wet weather there, and it got real uneven, and it just hasn't really recovered from that. The stuff that looks good, but there's a lot of holes in it.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
yeah.
And what we've seen in a lot of the corn here, really this past week and a half or so, is it's really starting to fire up, show some nitrogen deficiency. It's normal this time of year. We've been getting a lot of calls. Oh, did we run out of gas? Did we not put on enough nitrogen? That sort of thing. But really, I think this year we've just utilized a lot of nitrogen. The corn that's looked good all year, it's been pumping nitrogen through. It's had plenty of water up until really the last few weeks or so. We've had really adequate growing conditions, and I think a lot of it is just we've utilized a lot of nitrogen. I don't believe that we lost it. We had our tests versus the in-season urea and UAN, and those fields look the same. So I don't think we lost that nitrogen unless every form was lost. But a lot of it, I think, corn looks really good. We got a lot of yield potential out there, and it has to run out of something. I mean, the corn in the bag, we can grow 600 bushel corn, but it has to run out of something. And I would rather that something be nitrogen than water or potassium or something that we can control a little bit better, because we can't just throw out 250 pounds of nitrogen and just make sure it's green all year. That's not a realistic thing to do. On kernel counts on corn, Jason, what have we been seeing for the counts and ears around and long?
Well, I've been doing I count a lot around at this point, because a couple weeks ago when I was out in the fields a lot, it could still tip back. So I don't typically count the length yet. It's about time where I'm going to start. But around, I'm seeing anywhere from that 16 to 20. And we always talk about your ear around is determined at the V7, V8 time frame. And that's evident this year. The fields that were a little farther ahead when it was dry, they're 16 around. And the ones that had the rain, and it was very, when the things were going good and it was in the good cycle that we had, I call it cycles this year. We had our wet cycles and our dry cycles. They have 20 around, and they're looking very good. But even the 16s around, I think they're going to yield very well, because the kernels they're large and they're filled out, and they're much larger kernels in the 20s around. So, I hate to say any numbers, but from the kernel counts and what I'm seeing, I think we're going to see a lot of 200 bushel corn plus. I see there's some that's going to be in the 150s, of course, but there's a lot of farms that 150 is a good yield for. So I think we're going to see very good corn yields at this point. There's still a lot of things can happen. Our test weight is not determined yet. So we need a few more rains for our test weight, and we're going to find some water holes and some issues, I think, throughout the field that are going to drag down the fields a little bit. And in the northern part of our trade territory. Taylor, in the southern part, what are you finding?
About the same things. The early corn looks really good, what I've been in. Similar rows around like that. We do have some tip back in some areas. We have a lot of wet holes down there and stuff like that. the later planted corn, some of that's not really far enough along to really make a good assessment of where that's at. I think here in another week or two, we'll probably start to get a better handle on what that is. But as I said, some of that was just starting to pollinate. So, but that's really about what sums it up, I guess, on that. It's just the early corn looks good. The late planted stuff is too early to tell.
I was even in some corn. Was in some corn yesterday that was some of that late planted towards the end of May, maybe in the first week of June, and like you said, that's still pollinating right now. That was one that kind of missed some of the real extremes. Mm-hmm. So if we don't get an early frost, I mean that field still looks pretty decent. Everything's tasseled at the same time. I know when we're planting the first week of June, the yield potential we're down there, but if you could avoid some of those weather extremes, then might still have something there. We just got to make sure we don't frost in September.
And what we ran into on some of that, I mean, it was already sprayed, so you were committed to corn, and there was nothing out there. I mean, you had to replant. I mean, you couldn't leave it how it was. So,
but switching gears a little bit, we've talked about alfalfa and hay a handful on these podcasts, but we really haven't dove into much of the fertilization on it. Jason, what are some of the big things that guys have done this year? What are things that have worked in alfalfa and hay?
I'm a big proponent of micronutrients. So when you're fertilizing hay, I think they're just as important as your P and your K to limit your limiting factor. And we did a lot of fertilizations after first and second cutting. In the fields that we did, we put the micro product on and some P and some K. They look phenomenal compared to the field side beside it that didn't have the micro product and the P and the K. And I know you have to feed everything, so the P and K is very important, but that combination the hay looks incredible. And I think from the producers I've talked to that we've done this with, they're talking a third more hay out of that field, because the first cutting was a little short with the extremes we had, and then they were able to continue very similar second and third cuttings with adding the micro sink and the micro products and the P and the K at adequate levels, and some Pel lime and even some AMS at the right point. So there's a lot of things that we can do to help your micronutrients, your sulfur, your zinc, and your other products that boron the hay is needing. And we've overlooked that for a lot of years. You know, a lot of people that produce hay, they do it on their poorer ground, and I don't need fertilizer on that's my poorest field. Well, it does pay. You know, you're one bale of hay, who knows what it's going to cost this year. I've heard all kinds of numbers. So, you know, even at $50 a bale, it's definitely, you're getting over a bale, I believe, throughout the next two cuttings on fertilization using micro products. And so I think there's definitely a benefit to this. The stand looks green, so it's going to go into winter and overwinter much better. And there's a lot of health benefits to the hay as well. Taylor, what are you seeing in the southern part with the micro products and the?
Yeah, really about the same thing. We've been running a lot of sulfur and a lot of boron. We started that 3 or 4 years ago. We've done some with the microsync products too. Really, it makes a difference. It really does. Aside from just a normal P and K program, it's really easy to add into that. It's not a lot of cost involved with that. And really, in my opinion, I think some of the biggest benefits we see out of that is getting that on in the fall, just better crown health. So that we had 2 or 3 years ago, we had a really bad winter kill. And the fields that we had a better micronutrient program and stuff on there, them fields took it a little bit better. So it makes a difference.
Sure. And talking about winter kill, what, in your guys' opinion, is the last the last date to do the last cutting of hay? When should guys start thinking about, well, maybe I don't want to make that third or fourth cutting just so I don't, or late in September so we don't get a lot of winter kill? What's your kind of general rule of thumb, Jason?
That's a good question. It all depends when we get the first frost. Yeah. So I think by October 1st, you definitely should be done cutting the alfalfa. And if you want to take another cutting, wait till after that frost and wait till everything's down to the roots. But I think definitely by October 1st, if not the third week in September, just for your plant health, you don't want it to winter kill. So you want to get some growth back out there. So, it all depends on a frost. When do we get that? If it's the third week in October, we're probably all right cutting October 1. But if it's the first or second week in October, we might not be. Sure. So, the third week in September, I think, is a good rule of thumb. But if we have to stretch out a little bit, I know producers need hay and whatnot. So we have to optimize that as well. So.
Yeah. Well, good deal. now with these alfalfa and the corn and soybean acres, this month we're kind of starting to get into the planning month, and we've been doing our closeout reports and talking about soil sampling and where do the conversations go on soil sampling or planning for next year already, Jason?
Well, a lot of producers are a little hesitant to make that decision, but it's a time to do it. The combines haven't rolled yet, and as soon as that combine rolls through the field, it's time to be out doing a soil sample so we can get your lime and fertilizer spread, and do it timely and make sure we get it done before winter gets here. It's too cold, or our weather patterns it's highway, it can do anything. So now is the time to plan that your grid sampling and your any soil sampling to be done. I know there's some people are on the fence and have been kind of hesitant, but if now's the time to prepare that and get ready to do that, and so we can get it done and get your fertilizer applied.
Good. And as we start our planning in August, seed prices are starting to come out too, and there's some guys that look early. Taylor and I are gonna work on a guide, hopefully get at least the idea started this month. We don't quite have the seed prices out yet, but it's something that's coming soon, and the way all the inputs are this year, it's going to be the earlier the better. So we're going to be out there still looking at your fields, trying to figure out the best plan for next year, and probably coming out with a seed proposal or with fertilizer idea or lime application idea for next year, even before the combine goes in the field. Just once we want to get the ball rolling. We want to have a plan ahead, just so it's not a mad dash scramble to hit the deadlines in October and November, and then it's better for us to have a plan, better for you guys to have us to have a plan for you. So then everybody's on the same page, and it's we're all ready for the 2022 year. It's kind of crazy that we're already talking about it, but it's time to be selling those inputs. We've been out with some anhydrous, and we got some dry and fertilizer prices for fall. So we're gonna be out talking to you guys, trying to help you for 2022. With that, any other last comments, Taylor or Jason?
No, I just hope everybody has a safe harvest, and we'll talk again before harvest, but let's...
No, that sounds good. I appreciate everyone tuning in today to SFG Top Performance, and have a good week, and we'll be seeing you in the next couple weeks.